Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Court-Martail Podcast. Introducing your host for this evening first. He is the host with the most from the West Coast, the Bay Area Brawler, Skylar Greenberg. And his partner, he has colonized, energized, and revolutionized the podcasting wrestling world today. Your Colonial Champion, Sean
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the most exciting wrestling podcast made by Smarks for Smarks. I am your host for today, Skylar Greenberg, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to this show. We have so much to talk about, and I'm here to talk about it with a man who is the sweet Stan Lane to my beautiful Bobby Eaton. He is the mouth of the South of Connecticut. He is the man who, if you talk to him, he'll say, huh? The Colonial Champion, Sean McCarty.
Well, you ask and you shall receive. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a very fun show. I know it's going to be a very fun show. We have been putting this show off for, almost a month now. Actually getting to the topics that we're discussing, as well as the match and the spotlight, which we meant to do so long ago, but we're finally getting to it. And Skylar, what a tremendous imitation of an introduction that you have brought forth to the table today. And I know that the show is only going to go up from here. Thank God that we have amassed such a tremendous show to put together, and it is all your doing, sir.
Because, as you've always said, it's my show.
That's right.
It is my show today, and thank you for letting me host. Now, I expect more money in the mail, if you would please.
What money?
Well, you know, the money that you and me share because WWE keeps stealing our ideas. Before we get down in today's show, let's talk about what we're going to be doing for the next few weeks, because we have some exciting content coming up.
Yes, we do.
We have to watch AEW.
Well, you make it sound like it's going to be such a burden, Skylar, and I will have to say you are absolutely right. Because it is going to be unfun for most of that show. But there is intriguing matchups that I'm interested to see where they go with and what kind of direction they're heading in. And that will be really what makes all of that potentially worth watching.
It really depends on how much you are willing to stomach AEW. But if it's worth it for CM Punk, it's worth it for CM Punk. So that's right. Next week's show. The week after will be the third week of September. And that means NWL and ACPW come back into your lives.
That's right. Which means as well that we have got a tremendous show called the Hart Foundation Cup coming from the National Wrestling League. A big show, big event coming up, just like I had last month. And I cannot wait to see what's going to go on there. So many intriguing directions that this show's going to go. What a trios tournament. And we're celebrating Jim Cornette's birthday with a trios tournament the way he would want it.
The way he would want it. And then afterwards, we'll either have a regular show or we will review WWE Extreme Rules. I don't know what we're going to do, but we'll see what happens.
It depends on how bad Extreme Rules is.
It could be really bad.
It could be really bad.
That's the future. Right now, we need to talk about the past and the news of the week.
Coming straight to you from the Golden Gate Garage, this is the Wrestle News with Skylar Green.
That's right, folks. It's the news of the week. We are talking about the latest happenings in professional wrestling. And Sean, are you ready?
Let's hear it. We got a lot of news to talk about, I'm sure.
And we have to talk about the biggest news, the biggest man, the beast of the East, the beast incarnate, Brock Lesnar.
All right.
So apparently Brock Lesnar has re-signed with WWE for 1.5 years and 8 matches.
Wow. He's actually putting in some work here.
I know what you're all thinking. 8 matches in a year and a half, but given Brock Lesnar's track record, that's actually a lot for him.
Yeah, I mean, that's a significant increase in dates. Usually it's like, what, 3 a year, maybe? If that, it's none during the pandemic, pretty much.
So, I mean, hey, that Saudi Arabian blood money is coming in handy real quickly.
Well, that's true, and you know that they're planning to go back.
And that is the next rumored place for the Brock Lesnar match. Because right now, the plan is for Finn Balor to wrestle against Roman Reigns at Extreme Rules. Well, actually, they're not even going to do that. They're having it as the September 3rd match. I mean, you probably have already seen that match by the time this comes out. But Roman Reigns and Finn Balor are going to wrestle on the 3rd, but they're probably going to wrestle at Extreme Rules. But anyways, Brock Lesnar will be wrestling on that Saudi show.
Against Roman Reigns, presumably?
Yes.
Why are they giving us 2 Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns shows in Saudi Arabia? Why are they adding that feud that heavily?
Well, because it's the Saudi Arabians. They paid a lot of money.
I know.
So they deserve the best, right?
Well, and I wonder how that deal has changed considering the pandemic's circumstances.
They were told that they had to do 2 shows a year. They may have to do more now.
Oh boy. So now they're going to have to go 4 times a year, which is good. The WWE schedule is already exhausting. And then you're going to add on top of that going halfway around the world 4 times a year? And that's if you're not held up for money?
They're probably going to have to do that in order to make up for the dates they lost. But here's the thing, though. The rumor for that show is that they're going to have a Queen of the Ring tournament.
With who?
With the women of WWE. Yeah, so that's the thing, though. They're having a Queen of the Ring tournament in Saudi Arabia. Words I never thought I would say out loud.
Well, maybe this is can this not be some sort of PR stunt? Is somebody like Female Mansoor going to win the tournament?
Or Charlotte.
Or Charlotte, but that's if they don't decide to just jettison her in the next Shock release just so she can go be with Andrade and Rick.
That's the thing, though, is that I don't
know. It's so hard to tell because they still value her enough to want her to break Rick's record first.
But they want her to break Rick's record under her watch. They will pay obscene amounts of money to keep her around.
Yeah.
But then they get rid of her father and her fiance. This company is so stupid.
It makes no sense. But honestly, it's difficult because in all fairness, WWE for a long time has had the issue of having a roster that was so expansive of wrestlers and yet the talent still feels so thin.
Well, maybe it's a result of the talent that they did scout was just not good enough, so that's why they released a bunch of them.
Or formula just doesn't work for a lot of wrestlers that may work in a format otherwise. You know, WWE's been doing the same thing, the same way for a very, very long time with almost 0 modifications. The least in its history.
Basically, they're trying to fit a bunch of square pegs into round holes.
Right. Yeah, and it's continued not to work. And now that's why this whole Nick Khan releasing all this talent just feels like they're going to sell this company.
Well, and part of that, and that's speaking of the next news thing, is the rebranding of NXT.
Oh, Jesus God. I hate to use this photo, but folks, what you are looking at this exact moment is the new logo of WWE NXT. And
it looks like Dude Love had 1 too many drinks and threw up all over a shirt, and that's what it came out to be.
You know, Skylar, I remember finger painting in kindergarten. And I remember, if I had known those 3 letters in the same conjunction for some meaning, I probably could have finger painted into kindergarten a better designed logo than this. This is about as generic as it gets. I mean, I hate to it's like paint by number. I hate it. I just hate it.
Oh, and you know what makes this even worse?
I hate to say.
It's not just the fact that the logo's been rebranded, but control of the show is being taken over by Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard.
Almost like we saw that coming from a mile away. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the end of NXT. This was fun. This was really fun, boys. But it's over.
It is no longer Triple H's baby.
It's over. The NXT will now be no different than anything else, and any semblance of quality in professional wrestling on WWE's end is pretty much left to a handful of people.
I know. This is the problem with this, is that basically, you're taking the one thing that people loved about WWE universally, and you're taking it apart. And it's been bit by bit. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see Tommaso Ciampa and Johnny Gargano on this roster in a year or two.
I would say that it's going to be less than that. I would say maybe less than 6 months. I mean, at the rate that they've been knocking people off, it could be within the month. It depends on how irrational Vince McMahon wants to be about this whole thing. I mean, we know how Vince behaves. We know what Vince likes.
But the other thing, too, though, is the scouting, reportedly, is that they don't want to do independent wrestlers anymore that are older in age. They want to go for people who are younger, under 30, who have not wrestled on the independent scene but have great looks that they can teach wrestling. What's the problem with that, Sean?
Some will get it, most will not. And by get it, I mean understand the what's and the whys and the hows to do not just the moves, but the reasons for doing the moves. And what was the last star WWE properly made that didn't already have some sort of following or footing in the independent circuit?
Roman Reigns.
And how long did that take for him to develop?
A long ass time. Almost ruined. Okay, let's go even further. Who's a wrestling star that WWE has made that was not a second or third generation wrestler? Because Roman and Charlotte are the big two after that.
They had Braun Strowman and decided to kill him.
You could argue the last major star was John Cena.
Yeah, well, John Cena came from OVW, and his father helped promote in California and in Massachusetts. So it's
So
Cena had an
John Cena not count?
I don't think he does. I don't think he does at all. I mean, he came from the same crop of WWE. I mean, his first wrestling was in OVW, which was kind of under WWE. It was technically WWE's developmental, but
I mean outside independence. Like, what we're talking about is wrestlers who have wrestled extensively on the independent scene, like Kevin Owens or Sami Zayn. John Cena and guys like Brock Lesnar or Shelton Benjamin or Randy Orton or Batista, they were in WWE's fold.
Well, technically, yes. But I suppose if you want to break it down in those terms, then I guess John Cena would be the last. Orton, who came out of the same crop. Lesnar, who came out of the same crop. And I guess
crop is going a long time, and as great as they all are, they're not going to be around forever. It's amazing Randy Orton is still an active full-timer as he is.
Well, he started very young, and he developed very young. So he's what, just turning or turned 40, didn't he?
Yeah, Randy Orton is 41.
41, yeah, he is still pretty young, all things considered. Considering that most wrestlers now go well into their 50s.
Right, like Brock Lesnar's 44.
Well, I actually shouldn't say that. Most wrestlers who knew what they're doing and knew how to protect themselves go into their 40s and 50s. Most wrestlers nowadays barely break out into their 30s.
Right. But that's another thing, too, though, is that the idea that they're going for these athletically really good-looking people that don't know shit about wrestling and trying to teach them that, you're not going to get people who are just going to do it for the money. They're not going to do it because they love the business. As much as I shit on some independent wrestlers who look like shit, they get the business. They understand the business well enough.
I understand what you're trying to say.
Things.
Yeah.
It's just, I know the independent wrestling scene is a big mixed bag, right?
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is that you're trying to do all this in-house development. The in-house development for WWE in the past 15 years has been complete and utter shit.
Yeah.
Look at the roster of WWE today. Who can you say is a true homegrown talent?
You know what the shame of this is that there's a lot of good people there who ought to be teaching more about the business. And, people like Shawn Michaels and Triple H and even Matt Bloom. And they've got tons of people who come in, and yet somehow they still don't get it done. And you'd think that it can't be the teachers themselves. It has to be what they're told to teach.
Well, it's not just that, too, but what happens after the teaching is done? Like, how many times have we said, oh, this guy's big on NXT. He's going to be big on the main roster. They promote him or her, and then they ruin them with idiotic and nonsensical booking. I am still angry that they messed up Rhea Ripley. I am so angry that they messed up Bianca Belair. I'm so angry they messed up guys like, even if I don't like them personally, Karrion Kross or Keith Lee, these guys they promote, and these guys and girls they promote, they take them, they strip them of anything that makes them interesting, and they ruin them. Like, you are still angry about Shayna Baszler, and rightfully so.
That you're correct in that, but I'm also desensitized because Vince has done this so many times, because the whole idea behind WWE is no one is bigger than the brand. You're here for the brand, and it's not about making stars. And it's never been about making stars. And it's been about, and I quote, because they used this just recently, maybe it was in a Nick Khan quote, they want main characters. They don't want stars. They don't want wrestlers who are stars, who can make money and who can draw money. They're not interested in that. They have money. They want more money through means that don't require talent. And that's really what this is all about. They're going to slowly phase the wrestling out of wrestling. And
that's just going to be sports entertainment.
Yep.
And they're going to take the sport part out of it and just turn it into entertainment.
As if it isn't already. I mean, we all knew when they did these cinematic matches, even though it was circumstantial, we all knew where this was headed.
Yeah, it's just
realistically,
not good.
It's not good, but this is so expected. They did this to Shayna Baszler, yeah, because they do it to everybody. I mean, look how over Braun Strowman was not 3 years ago. He was on top of the world, challenging Brock Lesnar for the title in Saudi Arabia, and
even before that, he was wrestling against Brock Lesnar opposite in the pay-per-view main events.
He was monstrous. And then they team him up with a child to win the tag belts. And then they make him a goon to a couple other people. And then he leaves the company by going, I'm not stupid because I'm not Shane McMahon. And everyone who's stupid, who's ever been called stupid, I fight for you. And then he got hit in the head with a toolbox.
The only match he won for the world title was in 2 minutes and 30 seconds against Goldberg.
Yeah, and it was bad.
Oh boy, was it bad.
It was bad.
And then those matches with the Fiend at SummerSlam.
But he'd been dead long before then. Braun Strowman was killed long before he ever got in touch with Goldberg. They had done enough to destroy the gimmick that was Braun Strowman long before the train noises and long before he even got close to the world title, the way they jerked him around. And that was really the prime example among many people who've gotten over on their own, like the Sandows and the Riders. And this goes back a ways. That if you get over, we will derail you. We will derail you because we don't want anyone bigger than our brand, and CM Punk's return and the ratings it drew is exactly why they don't want to do that.
And speaking of, let's go ahead and pivot to AEW.
We're nailing these transitions today, bud.
Yes, we are. And speaking of that, man, we're going to talk about CM Punk for a little bit.
All right.
And something that you and me have both acknowledged about him during the last days of his WWE run.
Okay.
And that was that he was not healthy.
No, he was not.
And he admitted as much that had he had stayed in WWE, he probably would have been dead.
It's very possible. I mean, he looked gaunt. I mean, it was not good.
I mean, we all know about the staph infection. We all remember famously the have a Z-Pack.
Yep.
But it's just, I know it's been covered before, but now that he's returned, now that he is the big draw that he is, it's just a reminder of how badly WWE fucked him up.
Well, and this is going to be the interesting thing going forward, because I think with CM Punk now on AEW, if this is as successful as it may end up being for AEW, especially with the acquisition of Daniel Bryan and maybe some more serious people doing serious things on this program, might encourage a little more seriousness across the board as AEW's identity continues to develop. We too soon forget that this company is only 2 years old. And there's a lot of money that it's going into that show. So there's still a lot of time for that show to develop. I'm not saying it's any good, but there's still time. This could really end up being a wake-up call for WWE unless they have no interest in changing.
Exactly. It's just AEW is gaining momentum. Whether you, me, want to admit or not, he's gaining momentum. And AEW could become the number one wrestling company in the world.
Would I hate to see it, though? No. Honestly,
yes.
No.
Yes.
I wouldn't.
Yes.
I know it's stupid. I know the AEW's brand of wrestling is dumb for the most part. But if the reason that they do get better in the ratings is because their show genuinely improves, then I will not say anything about it. The question is, will it?
You know it's Tony Khan. And as long as Tony Khan is involved and he listens to his EVPs...
Well, here's the interesting thing. Here's the question I pose to you, sir. With the way that that CM Punk has completely now taken over the tone and the energy and the feeling of AEW, which you can't deny he has, because a star has shown up on AEW. What does this mean for the EVPs, especially if, let's say, Daniel Bryan starts coming in, or Bryan Danielson comes in, and then ratings continue to improve from there? What if these stars, I mean, Tony Khan's not an idiot. If he sees that ratings are genuinely improving because of people like CM Punk and Daniel Bryan, and they're not being moved in the needle or decreasing with these executive vice presidents, what if Tony Khan decides that things are going to change and different people are going to be in charge of different stuff?
Because he's going to have loyalty to his guys, because they are his guys. And you know that they're going to try and do whatever they can to keep their positions, even if it means burying other talent.
That I don't disagree with.
The handling of FTR is proof of that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They wanted to make sure that they were tucked away and buried. And instead of seeing them in anything meaningful, we get to see Young Bucks and Lucha Brothers in a steel cage kick off the show because they have to get their shit in immediately and get the hell out of there because they have to ruin every wrestling move known to man first and then leave.
Can we have one match where someone kicks one of the Bucks in the face, does a stiff pin, gets the titles, and walks off?
I'm genuinely considering just not watching that match, to be honest with you, and just skipping it.
No, that is bullshit.
I don't want the pain.
You are watching the damn pay-per-view.
I'll watch the pay-per-view. I'm not saying I won't watch the pay-per-view. But
you cannot invoke the pre-show rule and not watch the match.
But I want to have these moves have some meaning before they're all ruined by match 4, instead of all being ruined in match 1.
Okay, fine. I'll make you a deal. Okay.
You can skip one match and I will skip one match. How about that? We're allowed one skip.
Fine, but you're not allowed to skip the women's battle royal. You have to watch.
Oh, I will watch the women's battle royal. That's fine, because that's gonna be a dumpster. That's gonna be a dumpster fire so bad it'll be amusing. Young Bucks versus Lucha Brothers in a steel cage is not gonna be amusing. it's going to be boring.
No, it's gonna be fun for like the 20 moves that they do in 1 minute.
Yeah, after about 90 seconds, my wad is blown and I'm on to the next thing.
You're on to the next wad,
That's
and the
right.
next wad, and the next wad. Anyways, let's go ahead and just abandon all this modern wrestling bullshit.
I agree.
And let's go back to a concept that everyone has seemingly forgotten about, but is so old school and traditional, and honestly is maybe needed in today's professional wrestling. We're talking about alliances, and specifically the NWA.
Yes.
Now, before we begin, let's be clear. We're not going to talk about the history of the NWA because that in and of itself would require a month's worth of podcasting.
Too long. Yes.
And I'm also going to defer to you because you are the old school wrestling experts. Why don't you talk a bit about the NWA as an alliance?
Well, I appreciate and thank you for the compliments, Guy, but I can hardly call myself an expert. I have watched a lot of old school wrestling, which I have very much enjoyed, but an expert I am not. An enthusiast, an avid enthusiast I will claim to be. But in any case, the NWA, basically, for those of you who for some reason aren't aware of what we're talking about, the National Wrestling Alliance was formed in, I wish I had the actual dates for it.
I have the Wikipedia up.
Yeah, give me a quick date just for when it's formed, and then I can handle the rest.
So in 1948, Paul Pinky George, the promoter from the Midwest, founded the National Wrestling Alliance with the backing of 5 other promoters: Al Haff, Tony Steckler, Harry Light, Orville Brown, and the famous Sam Mushnick.
Yes, who was probably the best NWA president that they ever had, did the most for what the NWA stood for. Basically, the NWA was a consolidation of multiple wrestling territories around the world, and it was mostly in the NWA comprised of many territories. It started with 5 that kind of started mostly in like the Midwest and it did eventually envelop the Northeast and the Carolinas and Florida and yada yada. So the NWA was a huge network of territories, even though every territory was still its own entity with its own television, because it was all closed circuit back in the day for whatever television they could get, which, didn't even account for all the territories that they had that didn't have any television or had very little primitive television or none at all, which was going on, in the 50s into the 60s. And what was unique about the NWA is that it was promoters wanting to help other promoters. So they would help, say, hey, I've got a guy who's stale here. Can, let me send him over to you for, 6 months. You can run the territory. Or if somebody got into trouble and they go to another territory. And they said, oh, yeah, I can use these guys for some dates. I'll finish them up here and send them down your way. And it just was this massive network. But it framed the entire wrestling sphere into one considerably well-known notion, which nationalized wrestling in a different way. While it kept things independent, it was more like the NFL. It was more like a league than it was a singular entity like the WWE eventually became.
Because the whole idea with the National Wrestling Alliance was that it was maybe 20 to 30 or 40 different big promotions and thousands of smaller ones.
Yep.
But the idea was that you had all these wrestling promotions across the United States and Canada specifically that would trade talent. And the idea being that, hey, as a promoter, let's say I have 20 guys and I have like 4 or 5 who are main eventers, and I have 15 guys who are going to be here for like maybe a year or two. And then after my guys start getting tired, I'm like, you know what? I need someone new. I need fresh blood. Sean, you have 20 guys, and you have some guys that you're finishing up. Let's trade. I'll give you this tag team for this single wrestler. Or you give me this single wrestler for this single wrestler. Or, hey, I'll give you a manager and his tag team for another tag team.
Yeah,
that's
like,
how it worked.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've got this guy, Ted DiBiase, who's been drawing me some good money as our reigning Southwestern heavyweight champion, you know, but he's going to be run out of town here. He's got a loser leaves title match coming up. I can finish him up in 2 weeks, and you want him for 6 months, let him go over there and learn a new hold. And if there's somebody who you think can draw me some money, bring him down here and we'll do a nice talent exchange. And everybody made more money on that basis.
And the idea was that you would not have the situation where wrestling companies would try to take from each other. Because that was a big problem in the early days of the 20s and the 30s with wrestling companies who would steal each other's talents.
Yeah.
This idea was created so that you would have maybe 2 or 3 guys who stay with your company and were the big drawing guys, like the Jerry Lawlers or the the Bruno Sammartinos,
right,
who would stay in your company and be your big stars.
Right.
But the rest of the roster could be traded in and out so that you kept guys fresh. You got them exposed to new audiences, and they could learn different things. Like wrestling in the Northeast is different from wrestling on the West Coast.
Absolutely.
For example.
Absolutely. I mean, it was different styles. I mean, Texas, it was different than Oklahoma and Louisiana, just a few few hundred miles away. You know,
like it's different between wrestling in Dallas and wrestling in New Orleans. Like that's different, and
yeah,
those are right next to each other.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing about pro wrestling, and that was also the beauty of the territories, was that it was so unique and there were so many different styles. But that's where the ultimate unifier of having the NWA World's Heavyweight Champion was so brilliant, is that you could have a guy that was the guy that everybody wanted to aspire to be, you know, the big name in all the territories. And would this man lose his title, this big national wrestling title, in our show? Was it on our turf that the title switched hands? And there were a few NWA champions who traveled all the world. And you want to talk about a difficult schedule. The NWA World's Champion had maybe the toughest in pro wrestling, period.
Because you had to make the shot of, you had to wrestle maybe 25 days and 30 nights.
Yeah.
Like that's a type of schedule, and you wouldn't be wrestling in the same place. You would be wrestling maybe a week or two in one territory, then you had to go to the next one.
Yep.
And after you finish with that territory, you got to go to the next one. And here's the thing. The NWA at its largest was really big. Like, for example, you could be wrestling in Florida and then say, hey, you have to go to New York. Okay, I'll go to New York. Now you're going to go to Dallas. Okay, now I'm going to go to Dallas. Now you got to go to Detroit. And then you got to go to even Canada. You're going to go to Calgary to wrestle.
Or Indianapolis.
Okay, after,
yeah.
Or Calgary, after that, you're going to go to Indianapolis. Then you got to go to Los Angeles. Like, that's the schedule that the NWA champion would have to keep. And you have to please all these promoters who wanted the NWA championship.
Right. Oh, of course.
And the thing about it was that having the NWA champion boosted your sales, boosted your numbers, and you could say, hey, our local star is going up against the NWA champion, and wouldn't it be amazing if he became champion?
You know, and not that that obviously that didn't happen all the time, but when the title changes did happen, you know, then that guy went on the schedule as well. You know, it was just a great unifying way, especially in the days when kayfabe was very much alive and well, where people, obviously there were still the people who always suspected and always figured, you know, guessed that it was, but there was still that level of uncertainty. And when people really could accept and believe that this was real, this kind of NFL style presentation was exactly the type of thing that professional wrestling needed to be successful.
And it worked for almost 30 to 40 years, from the 50s of its creation until the 80s and 90s, until WWE got too big.
Yep. Until they decided to break off from the NWA and make some major moves and go into WrestleMania.
So did WCW.
Yep. And
then it just withered apart. And that's the issue with the Wrestling Alliance of the NWA, is that it lost its prestige as wrestling territories died out or left.
Well, it suffered a lot of losses. It suffered a lot of people kind of disrespecting it as Vince McMahon rebranded pro wrestling and the Hoganisms and the Rock and Wrestling really took off. The NWA suffered a lot of publicity blows as far as, like, for example, Shane Douglas throwing the NWA title belt down, just like not giving a damn about it. And just, you know, as iconic as that moment has now become, say what you want about Shane Douglas, but as iconic as that moment has become, the NWA, they suffered a lot of blows. Their reputation, you know, they lost a lot of territories because they either just got bought out or all the talent was gutted, you know, and they did their best to stay alive, but they just lost all their audience because at its core, the NWA itself was not a show until Crockett had really, you know, except for when Crockett made it big, but then when Crockett sold to Turner the rights to the NWA, it was never going to become its own entity and its solid entity, and it took Billy Corgan to make any semblance of it become an actual program.
But by that point, the NWA was no longer what it was.
Right.
And part of its downfall wasn't even necessarily the wrestling itself, but the times. Yeah. Videotape trading and cable TV made it so that when fans were watching different NWA promotions, they could see the plot holes and inconsistencies in the storylines.
Yep.
The presence of people like Ric Flair, who were on TV every week, it made their appearances less special.
Right.
And eventually people figured out that stuff was going on behind the scenes. Once kayfabe is broken, the NWA was kind of broken along with it.
Yeah.
Especially Black Saturday.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the whole concept was the NWA was the league, but when all the teams in the league are shown to be bullshitters, you know, obviously don't mean that in a derogatory sense, but as soon as you find that out, well, then what's the purpose of the league?
Exactly, and the NWA has withered down to just one promotion that's very small, and while it's still going on today, who knows if it's going to survive. I mean, Billy Corgan tried, but...
I think that they lost a lot. I mean, honestly, they genuinely lost a lot when Cornette left. To be fair, that really hurt that publicity was it ended up being really bad on their part. They ended up coming out of that very much the loser because their ratings just never recovered from when Jim left that show.
Right, and look at their roster right now. It's not very good.
No.
I mean, I know Trevor Murdoch just became the champion, defeating Nick Aldis, who was champion for over 1,000 days, basically 3 years.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have any. I mean, it has promise. There are things that are promising about NWA, but there's a reason why you and me don't talk about it as much. It's just another independent wrestling company at this point.
Yeah, you can only get so far with never-ending potential. As I feel like TNA was always, was always like that. They had never-ending potential, but they never lived up to it with the exception of, when they really were creating what they were creating. But they've not, ever since the ratings really started to tank, all I ever hear about Impact is, look how much potential's on this roster, how much potential's on this show. And it's just, at what point do you live up to it or you don't?
Right. I mean, and that's the thing, though, is that it's bad because more wrestling companies could use an NWA-style alliance. But, Sean, here's the thing. Could a wrestling alliance work nowadays?
Absolutely
now that the internet exists,
no.
Social media, the dirt sheets?
It's not even that. I think the culture of promotions isn't the same. The promoters themselves are not the same. What they're promoting as professional wrestling is not the same. And as such, an alliance like this, in order to make a league like this, you would have to have credibility in the first place to put an alliance like that together.
And you don't think that right now, with the way that wrestling landscapes is, promoters are looking to help each other out. They're just looking for themselves, number one.
And even if they are, they're too small time for it to make a difference. I mean, look at how much AEW was supposedly helping Impact and how Impact's ratings have improved 0.
Right. So much for the Forbidden Door and working with New Japan and all the business that they got from that, which is maybe a couple of Japanese wrestlers coming in and getting maybe a couple thousand viewer increase.
Yeah. Yeah, if that. And this is why I'm so interested to see where AEW goes from here on in, especially now that Punk is there and Danielson is coming. Are they going to make moves like that going forward? Because really, the talk of professional wrestling, whether we like it or not, is two companies. WWE, AEW. That's it. That's it. And even if every other independent promotion in this country consolidated into a league, they wouldn't have anything to talk about. There wouldn't be anything to exchange at this rate, because they'd only be really, the only things that they rely on at this point are names that are in AEW or WWE.
And there's not enough talent to go around the trade. And what's the point of having one person stay in one company when they can work multiple territories?
Right. And unfortunately, and especially because the two big names are billionaires dealing out billionaire money to people, I just don't see an alliance working in today's just uber capitalist wrestling society. That's the only way I can describe it. We turned it into, instead of everybody collaborating all to the same end, we've turned it into the monopoly board.
Exactly. And it's just disappointing that we can't go back to the old days and old time wrestling. Oh, wait, we can.
At least in memory. And you know what that means? That means we've got to review a match that, God, I don't even know how to segue into this match. I guess the best way is with our intro. Roll it.
What time is it? It's the fight, it's the brawl, it's the match of the week. It's tonight, watch along with the son of a beat. It's one fall, they down for the 1, 2, and 3. So don't stall, hang on to the edge of your seat. We got a punch and a flip and a powerbomb too. All the moves and the stars are all under review. See the baby face cheered and the heels get heat. This is wrestling at its peak. It's the match of the week.
That's right, folks. So the year is 1987, and we have got a very weird matchup here. It is the Midnight Express defending the United States Tag Team Championships against the fabulous Freebirds, Buddy Rogers and Michael P.S. Hayes. And first of all, this was weird because babyface Freebirds, which is not something I've seen very much of. It's also weird because, this is also under the NWA banner. But then three, and why don't you describe why this match, at least in both of our minds, was weird?
So the part that's weird is that it was a nonsensical story. And maybe this is part of the decline of the NWA, is that the storytelling was starting to get really bad because fans were getting smarter. They were going to see things that you were going to do, and this just made no sense. So let's break this down. First off, Jim Cornette's suit.
I liked those golf cart entrances. I thought those were kind of funny.
The golf cart entrance was good, but that suit, it's not your best suit jacket, Jim. Trust me.
He's not no one's accounting for taste here, but
but the NWA United States Tag Team Champions, they looked in good shape. Like Bobby Eaton and Sweet Stan Lane, they were looking good.
As they almost always do.
And I love Jim Cornette on the microphone saying, everyone here wants to have sex with these boys. And then
No, that's not the phrase he used. Every girl in this arena wants to molest the Midnight Express. That was his choice of words. I want that to be clear. That was the quote from the Cornette himself.
Yes. Here come the Freebirds. And can I just say, Michael P.S. Hayes, it's weird seeing him young because I've only seen him old, but
he looked decent, didn't he?
Well, I mean, he looked decent, but he looks like my dad after with a beer belly after a couple of beers. Hey, a couple of beers, I'm going to fight this guy.
Yeah, I mean, that in itself was pretty much Michael Hayes' gimmick, was it not? I mean,
basically. So I mean,
but that's the best part of. That's why I like the Freebirds, though. I think that's why Texas loved the Freebirds.
Yes, because they were this group.
Because he was everybody's dad with a beer belly who had a couple and wanted to fight the neighbor.
Exactly. So, the two Freebirds that were fighting this match were Michael Hayes and Buddy Roberts. Which, hey, Buddy. Okay, that pun was so bad. I apologize. I'm sorry.
Go stand in the corner and think about what you just said.
I will. Anyways, go ahead and tell the people about this match for a little bit.
So here's my problem with this match. It wasn't even so much the match itself, but the production of this match was god awful. I would prefer Kevin Dunn's massive camera cut bullshit over this production. It was awful. The microphones. Now, was
this Texas?
This was, I believe, Texas. But it was just, it was terrible. I mean, they couldn't, the camera would go onto the crowd at times and they'd miss spots. You know, they'd just look at like random people. They'd bring it down to like Cornette and they'd be busy with him as something major happened in the ring. Everything they missed, they nearly missed the finish. You know, the camera work was absolutely terrible. And then, you know, we'll get to this when we get to the actual aftermath of this. But the people, the commentary screaming about the aftermath, and the camera zooming out of the ring, like getting further and further away from the ring, like we're about to be taken on a spaceship. Like you can't see what's going on. It was all the way through this. Sometimes you couldn't hear the commentary because the audio was too fucked up. It was bad. The actual AV people were bad on this show. And it deserves recognition.
And wasn't this match also in like a high school football field?
Or a baseball field or something. I mean, it was, which is not unheard of for pro wrestling. That's a pretty common venue. I mean, I'm going to try probably, there's an indie promotion doing at a state, or actually at a local fair in North Haven up a couple days that I'm trying to hit to. So, in any case, you know, that's not uncommon, but it definitely was weird because when Jim cut the promo, you couldn't hear the fans' reaction at all.
Because they didn't have it mic'd up at all. And the thing about it is that the camera angles, whoever was playing this show with the camera angles were really bad.
Bad. The production was awful. It was hard to even get invested or enjoy the match, which was fine. You know, clunky, but that's old school wrestling for you, and that's kind of what I like about it, is that it's a little clunky, makes it look a little bit more like a competition. And then it just ended very, very quickly.
Here's the thing. I will say this. Seeing Michael P.S. Hayes do a nip-up is so weird.
That was weird. That was very weird. But it got a huge pop.
Oh, it did. But the part about this match that really was weird was when they did the part where Stan Lane accidentally slaps Bobby Eaton.
Yeah.
And they teased the tension between the Midnights.
Which they never did. You know, they never did any of that because this was still Dusty booking, so Dusty hadn't been taken out, you know, because 88 was still fine, you know, and I think that was when Dusty left, was 88, and then Jim Herd got brought in, and George Scott, and then the Midnight got screwed over and left in mid-1990, I think it was.
Now, here's the thing, though, is that the Freebirds, they all, in 87, where were they wrestling?
Mostly in Texas, I think. Oh, well, no. Because World Class had already pretty much become unusable at that point. So they had to have been in mostly the Carolinas. Maybe Florida?
No, it had to be, I think it was World Class, wasn't it?
World Class, I mean, they had, well, then again, that audience was not really that huge. So I suppose that could have been World Class, because World Class was not majorly, by the time the 85 and 86 had come around, a lot of the Von Erichs had come and gone, so to speak. So the reputation of World Class had really deteriorated.
Right, but it was still Texas. We can audibly say it's still Texas.
I think so.
And Jim Cornette has been very prevalent in his saying that Texas was some of the worst that booking that he's ever seen in his entire life.
Well, this was up there.
And this to me, it definitely does feel like it was so bad because this booking was nonsensical. Who was in charge of booking this is the question. We don't know it for sure. We can look it up later and then add an addendum to this match. But whoever was booking this match clearly had no idea how to use the Midnights. And really almost had no idea how to use the Freebirds because the Freebirds being babyface is weird.
You know, I hate to say that this might have been Dusty because Dusty was doing a lot of these finishes for the NWA at this point. He was doing a lot of them.
The finish was fine, but the part where they were not working together or they were just the main story of this match was that the Midnight were bumping into each other. Like when I think it was Buddy Rogers who took Stan Lane and Irish whipped him into Bobby Eaton.
And I almost feel like they were just kind of teasing it because maybe they were just being like, oh, are we going to descend? But like, I feel like that's a stretch still. Because they did this pretty much all the way up until the comeback, during the comeback, which lasted all of 15 seconds, into the finish, which lasted all of 15 seconds, and then the afters, which lasted, well, no, it was fast. Like, it was pretty much the heat spot, which was the Cornette distracted the referee and Stan Lane tripped up. I believe it was Buddy? I think it was Buddy.
Michael P.S.
Oh, it was Michael Hayes.
Rogers. Because Buddy Rogers was the one who got the hot tag.
Right. And then they did this. They did the heat spot, and then that only lasted, all of 2 minutes. And then they did the comeback, which was 2 minutes, or not even 2 minutes, to the finish, which was not even 30 seconds. And that was it. And then they zoomed out like it was the end of the movie Dune, and we're just, whoop, gone. Even though they had the rest of the Freebirds come in.
Which, by the way, if Michael P.S. Hayes, seeing him was weird. Seeing Garvin was weird. What the hell was he wearing with that fucking crop top?
Yeah. And I mean, Gordy looked good, but he always did.
Yeah, but Garvin was bad looking. Also, I can tell it's the 80s based on the hair I kept seeing all around the ringside area.
Yeah, as if the entrance music wasn't enough to clue you in.
And then the Freebirds get on the microphone and this nonsensical promo from Michael P.S. Hayes. Like, Hayes...
I actually liked it.
Like, it was passionate and it was great, but really when you dissect what he said, he didn't say anything.
Well, you know, Michael P.S. Hayes never really had to say anything to get his point across because, you know, it's all about the promo and the energy delivered in the promo. Look at Warrior. Look at how much his promos were beloved when he said absolutely nothing all the time.
Now, this was a TV match, right?
Oh, without a doubt. Which, thank God, because Bob Caudle and, what was his name? Johnny Weaver. You know, and I love Bob Caudle's, like, just never-ending smile. Johnny Weaver forgot the name of Nikita Koloff, who Luger faced earlier in the night.
Right. And also, let's also give a shout out to the ring announcer for announcing the Midnight at a combined weight of 276 pounds.
Yes, I was going to mention that. I was like, boy, maybe they're more alike to the Young Bucks than we gave them credit for.
Well, they keep saying that they're the modern-day Midnight Express.
Well, if the Midnight were only 276 pounds, then they might be onto something.
Well, Bobby Eaton was 275 pounds, and Stan Lane was only 1 pound. So, anyways, this was a weird match back into it, and hopefully this was not their best work, because if it was, my God, the Freebirds versus Midnight, oof.
I mean, no, this obviously could not have been their best. There's no way that this was their best. No, I could guarantee you that this was not the best of either of these guys, but we've noticed that time and again, that sometimes you get paired with people that you think it should be incredible, and then it just isn't. And it's the weirdest thing, but it does happen from time to time.
Yeah. Anyways, let's go ahead and leave this behind, and we're going to talk about one of the guys in this match, unfortunately, because of a recent passing. And it is beautiful Bobby Eaton.
Yeah.
Now, I will defer to you because you're the more old school wrestling person. Can you talk about Bobby Eaton? Because I know you've seen a decent amount of his matches.
I have. And if you want to go and just give the look up as far as like his career and when it started and all that jazz and his actual timeline, because I'm not solid on it, but I'll tell you about at least my feelings of Bobby. There are only two people in this planet who are technically, or in some description, could be considered celebrities that have made me cry. Only two. The first was Robin Williams, because nobody didn't cry about Robin Williams. And the second was Bobby Eaton. And I started to wonder why, because like I didn't really know, obviously I'd never met Bobby. I wasn't alive for most of his in-ring work, and when I was just a wee lad, still in me Oshkosh Bagosh. And so I didn't really get the chance to ever really absorb Bobby until really this past couple of years. I've been listening to Cornette's podcast. He's been doing these watch-alongs, so I've been watching a lot of the Midnight's work with that. But I've also been, I've been doing it for the Court-Martail podcast. We watched that match with the Fantastics 7 months ago. And that I actually rewatched today because we almost did it for the match of the week this week before we found out that we had already done it. But in any event, it's just, to me, I started to realize that why Bobby meant so much to me was that Bobby personifies everything I love about professional wrestling. He is the epitome of my fandom of pro wrestling. A guy that may not look like a Greek god, but he looks like an athlete. He works like he's an incredible worker. He was diverse in every move he made. It was deliberate. It felt natural. It felt organic. And in a lot of ways it was, because he didn't know how he did a lot of the stuff that he did. As Cornette's podcast about him had revealed. But to me, Bobby Eaton signified pro wrestling at its core, at its base of what a true artist at work. And I hate to use the word artist, but I mean that in an actual good, in a promotional way to describe what Bobby did. Bobby was a wrestler, but watching him wrestle was art.
Now, let's be clear about something, okay? Kenny Omega, you
Not
are a
art.
wrestling shit artist, okay?
Yeah.
Because Bobby Eaton is what it means by wrestling artist. He's not the most physically gifted, but he has a mind, and he sees things, and he does things in ways that some wrestlers who have experienced things for 20 years never get.
Yep. And to make you believe in Bobby, you believed in everything he did. And he made you believe, in a time when, even though I never was around really for the major era of kayfabe, I still get hooked into his matches because I'm like, God, this guy was fighting his opponent. And you believed. He makes you believe. And in a way that few really do. Hogan, he's got the big, the over-the-top charisma, and obviously that worked for the era that he was in. But when I watch wrestling, I like suspending that disbelief that these guys really want to fight each other. These guys really are mad or are pissed or athletically fighting each other like a UFC fight, and actually fighting each other. I love suspending that disbelief for what I can. And Bobby always made me believe. And still does every time I watch his matches.
Exactly. So let's talk about his career for a little bit. He started in NWA Mid-America working for Nick Goulas. And
that's right.
And he worked in Mid-America at the age of 17. He was young when he joined.
He was.
And within a year's time, at the age of 18, he was working his way up close to the main event, working with guys like the Hollywood Blondes, Jerry Brown, and Buddy Roberts.
Yeah.
Trained by Tojo Yamamoto, by the way.
Who had trained a surprising amount of American wrestlers.
Yes, he did. Now, guess who he won the NWA Mid-America Tag Team Championships with?
I should know this. Because I heard this the other day, and I can't remember. Now I'm blanking.
Leaping Lanny
Poffo. That's right. Lanny Poffo, my man. I love Leaping Lanny. You watch some Leaping Lanny in Mid-South. It's entertaining.
Right. And this is the fun part about Bobby Eaton in wrestling in general, is that you are going to wrestle so many people over and over and over again. And that was true for the NWA, because when you're in the NWA, you're going to wrestle the same guys over and over again if you move to different promotions.
Yep.
For example, he had the chance to wrestle against guys like the fabulous Freebirds.
Yeah.
He wrestled Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy. He wrestled his future tag team partner, Dennis Condrey.
Yeah, I mean, Bobby got around before he ever really, obviously he had a name, but before he ever really had a name, Bobby got around and wrestled a lot of guys.
Right. So after he spent 4 years with Mid-America, he goes to Continental Wrestling Association, and he wrestles for Jerry Jarrett.
Yep.
And again, same thing. He wrestled against Stan Lane, his future tag team partner.
Yep.
He wrestled against guys like Sweet Brown Sugar. He wrestled against Jimmy Hart's tag teams.
You know who Sweet Brown Sugar is?
Yes.
Do tell the people who Sweet Brown Sugar is.
Coco Beware.
That's right.
And then, but here's the thing: 83, Mid-South, Bill Watts, Jim Cornette, Dennis Condrey, the foundation of the Midnight Express.
And that was a Bill Watts creation.
Yep, working with Bill Watts, teaming with Dennis Condrey, and working with Jim Cornette as his manager. This was the formation of arguably one of the greatest tag teams of all time.
Yeah, and it's unsurprising that Bill Watts was so uncanny at seeing the potential in people, and not everything that he did was exemplary, but Bill Watts. We need to have a discussion, an at-length discussion about the legacy of Bill Watts, because I think if we actually did a deep dive into what he did for the wrestling business, we'd be really satisfied with our results, because these guys are not the only team that he had put together or that had become a major name, but it's definitely one of the hallmarks of his legacy is creating the Midnight. And their debut was very fun.
I mean, the tag team that they took the titles from when they won the titles was Magnum TA and Mr. Wrestling 2.
Yeah.
That angle is famous, by the way, for Eaton and Condrey tar and feathering Magnum TA.
That's right. And that was that whole angle, and especially because of what they did at that time, because when they went to work Houston in 83 and 84, as they were starting to do that, there's another great matchup that we should watch at some point. It's the Midnight versus 2 and TA, and God, the roof just is blown off the place. It's deafening, the whole match. The entire match is deafening. You cannot hear the commentary. They were killing it. All of the money that they were making from that show and from all of those shows, just facing each other from there, and they only got better from there. They went to Georgia, they went to the Carolinas, they went to work Florida, they went to World Class.
And the other thing, too, is that they got to wrestle against some of the best tag teams that wrestling had to offer. I would argue that the mid-'80s is the era of the best tag teams in the history of the NWA.
Yes.
Because in 84, they got to wrestle the Rock and Roll Express in Mid-South. In 84, 85, they had a long rivalry with the Fantastics in World Class. Even if the rest of the experience was not great, wrestling against the Fantastics was probably worth it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, honestly, the Fantastics was a fun team as well. I mean, there were so many teams in the 80s that were getting around. I mean, some that were thrown together on the spot, some that weren't. But you always said there was so much diversity, and also there was so much level of tag team wrestling because it was carried with the same weight as the world's title, and that was another big part of it, is tag team wrestling was treated just as seriously and had the same level and tone of respect as singles wrestling, and it's really a Vince McMahonism that it's not now.
Right, and that's the thing, though, is that it could make you that wrestling. When they got the Jim Crockett and they were wrestling against the Rock and Roll, they were wrestling against the Road Warriors. Talk about a big feud.
Yeah, that was a huge feud. One of the few teams that the Road Warriors said, we're jobbing to you guys cleanly for.
Right.
Which very seldom happened with the Road Warriors, if you go back and look.
Right. And then in 87, Condrey left, and then he's teamed with Sweet Stan Lane, and arguably that version of the Midnight Express was even better.
It was different.
It was different.
It was different. Different tone. I think it was the same. I like both equally, having watched a good amount of both teams. Stan brought a different speed, a different agility to the Midnight Express that they didn't have before, that kind of made them a little bit more aerodynamic, as opposed to Condrey being a lot more deep-seated as a ground attack, where Bobby would be the one who would do more of the, the top rope stuff. It definitely became a little bit more, it was a faster team with Sweet Stan. But it worked equally as well because of the anchor that is Bobby Eaton, because of just how good and diverse his work and his movesets were. And to have that kind of mind to know how to diversify each match to make it feel and look different.
Now, here's the thing, though, is that eventually, after a while, he is split up from the Midnight. He does his own singles run, becomes television champion in WCW.
Yeah, we're glossing over so much. We're glossing over so much.
I mean, we are glossing over so much. Like, there were so many matches and feuds that they had, and this is stuff that we could, talk about, but it's just, there's so much.
Yeah, like the Midnight versus the original Midnight, when Paul Heyman and Dennis Condrey and they did that whole deal. I mean, that was huge.
The Dangerous Alliance, the Samoan SWAT team, the new version of the Fabulous Freebirds.
Doom!
The
feud with Doom was so good.
The stuff with the Steiner brothers. The stuff with Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson.
Oh, good. There's so many good feuds. Honestly, it's just worth going back and looking at. It's genuinely worth just going back and looking at.
Here's the thing, though. Jim Cornette and Stan Lane, they left WCW. Eaton chose to stay. Wrestling What If? What if Eaton had left with them?
Because
he would have been in Smoky Mountain.
Oh, well, they obviously would have been in Smoky Mountain, and that wouldn't have been anywhere of a dispute. And probably Smoky Mountain would have made a good chunk of money. I don't know whether that would have changed the direction of Smoky Mountain in the long run. Genuinely. And I don't see Vince McMahon picking up the Midnight proper. Considering how little they wanted the Steiners when they showed up. And even, the working relationship when Jim showed up with the Heavenly Bodies, with Dr. Tom and Jimmy Del Rey, even how that was only a flash in the pan at most to what tag team wrestling they wanted. But
here's the thing, though, is that if Bobby had been at the beginning of Smoky Mountain, I mean, I know they made a decent amount of money, but maybe they would have made more if you had the Midnight Express with Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton. Like, Tom Pritchard was okay, and the Heavenly Bodies were a good tag team, but Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton, that would have made a lot of money.
Sure. Yeah, I won't disagree with you on that. It absolutely would have made a lot of money. But considering that Jim closed Smoky Mountain mostly from burnout rather than from lack of funds, for the most part, really kind of tells the story. And I think that inevitably, considering Bobby had his wife and he was looking out for his wife and, his kids, I feel like that would have inevitably hurt Bobby more than helped. Which I know, considering that he was just taking Turner's money and working occasionally from then on out, maybe that was better what Bobby needed in the long run. I mean, by the time the mid-90s rolled around, Bobby had been wrestling for almost 20 plus years.
Now, here's the thing, though, by the way. You mentioned his wife, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk about my favorite Bobby Eaton story?
Please do.
So, he's dating Donna Dundee. That is the daughter of Bill Dundee. And they kept their relationship a secret for a long time because Bill Dundee had a rule that no one could date his daughter.
Yep.
And then eventually he found out that Bobby Eaton was the one that was dating his daughter. And Bill Dundee got mad at first. And then he was just like, at least you picked a nice guy.
Yeah. If that doesn't describe Bobby Eaton, I mean, genuinely beloved by everyone that he was around.
Exactly. Like, this is Bill Dundee. I know he looks like shit, but he is a guy
He's
who
a badass.
you do not want to fucking mess with.
Badass. I wouldn't want to fuck with Bill Dundee. No,
Right.
sir.
No, sir. And he was the booker for a long time. And he's another guy that we have to talk about eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When on our next territory deep dive, we'll take a look at Bill Watts and Bill Dundee, the Bills of pro wrestling.
The $2 bills.
That's how we're billing it. Is
the Bills of wrestling. But anyways, Bobby Eaton, even in his later years in the early 2000s, after the WCW stuff, which we don't need to get into the WCW stuff. It was
if only he had actually beaten Goldberg's streak, which Goldberg wanted.
That wouldn't have worked.
No, it would not have at all. But still, Bobby Eaton, I would have enjoyed it.
Right, and Bobby Eaton wrestled in TNA. Well, he made a one-night appearance in TNA, but he kept wrestling, and he kept working with the other members of the Midnight, particularly Stan Lane, and they wrestled against the Rock and Roll several times, even in their older days, and it's amazing.
Yeah. Those two teams just had a natural chemistry. I mean, it's one of the weirdest matches. Just while we're talking about older wrestlers wrestling and older things, have you ever seen the infamous Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view?
Oh God, I know you are doing significant disasters of wrestling in single matches.
Yeah, God.
You could do that entire show.
You could do that whole show, with the exception of Stan Lane versus Tully Blanchard was actually not bad.
Everything else, though.
Everything else was pretty bad, but that match, I was like, you know what? That was actually all right, and the crowd actually got into it.
It was the only good thing on that entire show.
But you wonder, how does that show stack up now to some of the modern wrestling that we have? You know, may go close toe-to-toe here before too long, depending on
here's
how...
the thing, do you remember that card?
I remember a lot of that card. I've blurred a lot of it out of my memory because of the Yoko and Jake Roberts finish.
Well, here's the thing. Let me read that card to you, okay?
Yeah, you're going to bring your PTSD me here, Sky, to close the show.
The Samoan SWAT team defeated Marty Jannetty and Tommy Rogers.
That was slow, and Marty was fucked up.
Greg the Hammer Valentine with Sensational Sherry defeated George Steele.
Greg looked fine. George Steele did not look fine.
Too Cold Scorpio defeated Julio Fantastico.
Too little too late for Too Cold Scorpio.
The Bushwhackers defeated the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov.
Jesus, Iron Sheik could barely move at that point.
The aforementioned Tully Blanchard versus Stan Lane, which the crowd was dead by that point, and that match saved him.
It saved the show from people just walking out.
Here's the match that would make them walk out. Abdullah the Butcher with Honest John Cheatham versus One Man Gang, ending in a double countout.
Oh, that was awful. I remember that. That barely ran any time at all. It was like in and out.
It was 7 minutes. Jimmy Snuka with Captain Lou Albano versus Bob Orton Jr.
They tried, but Snuka was, again, too little too late for Jimmy. Oof.
And the main event, Jim Neidhart and King Kong Bundy with Michael Henry defeating a really fucked up Jake Roberts on drugs and Yokozuna.
Just
who
wicked
was
drunk.
So heavy.
Yeah. Yoko he was easily in the 900-pound range at that point. He was enormous. And he couldn't move. He just couldn't move around the ring. And Jake was drunker than a pet skunk.
And by the way, the famous Jake Roberts incident where he was so drunk and he was doing a promo and legitimately said, "You don't want to play cards with me because I'll cheat. Okay, I'll cheat. You want to play 21? I've got 22. You want to play blackjack? I've got 2 of those. 2. You want to play ace and an 8, baby? I got too many of those too."
Yeah.
And
you know what? They called that back on AEW. Remember that? Remember they called back to that in the very first women's casino battle royal, which we're gonna get to see the next one of. Hooray! And it was a mere 2 years ago. Jake Roberts reprised his role, this time as a blackjack dealer, who was the last person I would trust to be my blackjack dealer. Is Jake Roberts.
Right, but here's the thing. Remember, in that main event, Roberts made his way to the ring and supposedly grabbed a female fan and made her rub his chest, and then while he was doing so, removed the snake from his bag and pretended to stroke it. No, yes. He actually stroked
No, he actually did it. He had that snake in between its legs, and that snake looked so confused.
While Roberts is stroking it and forcing a woman to touch his chest.
Yeah, this was 1999, ladies and gentlemen.
And then Roberts collapsed in the middle of the ring, and the snake draped over his body. And then as Roberts began to get up, he attempted to kiss the snake.
But you know what? The best lesson we could learn from that whole incident is that you knew the class of wrestler that wasn't going to have much respect, and you knew the wrestlers that were universally going to always have that respect, like Bobby Eaton, who... and then, after that, he had made reunion shows. He had done a couple things, but, his body started to wear on him, and he was never one for social media, so he was never on TV or, he was obviously on TV a lot, but he was never watched TV or had the internet or a cell phone. So they did a big show, a Don't Tell Bobby tribute show to him a couple years ago before the pandemic, which was really cool that they all got photos of him of. And then... just of late, just about a month ago, he had been in the hospital. He came back. He was doing all right. And then there was a complication and he went. And it hit all of us by surprise.
It was unfortunate because it's a guy who later on was suffering. He had diabetes. He had a heart attack in 2006, which almost killed him.
Yeah,
he had to have a pacemaker installed. And then in July of this past year, he had a fall in Nashville. He broke his fingers and injured his hips. And then just on August 4th, 1 month ago, died in his sleep.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to go. And it's just a shame it did. It's just, Bobby Eaton is in a league of his own. You could say there are the good wrestlers and the great wrestlers and the ones who drew the most money and the ones who had the best runs or won the most titles. And then you ask all of them who was their favorite wrestler, and most of them will say Bobby Eaton. And Bobby Eaton is a tremendous example of what pro wrestling could be, should be.
Exactly. And Bobby Eaton, the consummate professional. He is the man that everyone should aspire to be, and not the fucking yumbucks.
Yeah. No. Yeah, you never see Bobby Eaton write a book called Killing the Business.
You're never going to see Bobby Eaton attempting to do every move he knew how to do in the history of professional wrestling and of the world and all time.
Because he would split them up in 6 or 7 different matches. He'd do every move he knew, but he would split it up and diversify it in a bunch of different matches so none of them felt the same. That was one of the things that people accosted Ric Flair for, which... having watched quite a few Ric Flair matches of my own from those days and well into his later run, Rick was very much a cut-and-paste wrestler. Bobby Eaton was the exact antithesis of that.
Exactly. And thankfully, we have YouTube, we have wrestling tapes that we can watch and we can see his matches.
Yeah, and rest easy, Bobby, but no, it's weird because, I think in death he's received probably more publicity than he's ever had before. Well, besides his run on top, obviously. But it shines a light on someone who deserved the same level of recognition as people like the Austins and the Rocks and the real top names of this industry, the real crucial names of this industry. Bobby Eaton is one of them. Rest easy, Bobby. We love you very much, and we will see... We're going to be watching more Midnight in the future. That is a fact.
Yes, we do, and hopefully we don't have to watch more Midnight when the other members... This is the hard part about wrestling, is that as you get older, you start losing your heroes.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's definitely true. And Bobby was a shock. Was definitely a shock. But the more that we move on, the only way out is through. I'll quote Howard Finkel. What can we do, Jim? We must press on.
We must press on. And
so
will we press on as we move on to our next show coming up in a little bit. But it is that time for our commercial break.
It's our review of AEW All Out. We're going all out, Skylar.
Anyways, I want to thank you for allowing me to host, my man, and I will be giving you back the hosting chair when we have to review AEW.
Well, and just a little point of order here, because things have kind of got thrown into whack a little bit as far as our Monday night releases. This is probably going up. Today is, as the time of recording, is probably going up on the 4th, as you mentioned, Sky, which would be Saturday. So on the actual day, this is going up on the day of All Out, not running against it. It'll probably be during the day. So you'll be hearing this before All Out. The review of this show will probably be next Friday, and then when we have that released, we will also have that following Monday, our ACPW versus NWL show. So it's going to be a little condensed, but we're going to make it work.
Basically, we were thrown off of our schedule, and rightfully so for real-life circumstances.
Yep.
But we're going to get back into the swing of things soon enough.
That's right.
And we'll get back to our regular Monday releases.
That's right. And so just bear with us a little bit. It's Mondays, it's Fridays, it's Saturdays. No matter what day you're watching, the Court-Martail podcast is always a good decision. And now that Sam Adams is going to come at us and sue us for copyright, it's time to take that commercial break. Skylar, thank you very much for hosting. I will see you after All Out. And I will see all of you after All Out. We'll be right back right after this.